for Brielle. Her hands trembled as she closed the browser. In that moment, the sadness turned to clarity. It was a Sunday, soaked in sunshine, when Leona Devoren's life quietly shattered. Her family had gathered at their favorite Mediterranean restaurant, the Olive Grove, for what her mother called a surprise announcement. Leona, 31, had rushed from her double shift at the hospital to make it in time, hair still damp under her cardigan, scrub pants tucked into sneakers. She assumed it was about her sister Brielle, again. Brielle, the golden child. 5 years younger, makeup always perfect, somehow able to float through life in a haze of just enough effort with stunning results. She was the influencer, the baby, the one their mother swore had a heart like honey, though Leona had seen that honey turn to acid too many times to count. Leona barely had time to set her bag down before her mother beamed and tapped her wine glass. "We have big news," she sang. "Brielle has something to share." Leona looked toward her sister, who stood like she'd been rehearsing this moment in a mirror. Her manicured fingers gripped a small velvet box. There was a flutter in Leona's chest, something uneasy and cold. "I'm engaged," Brielle said, lifting the box and flicking it open. Gasps filled the table. Their father clapped. Aunts leaned in. Leona froze. Because the ring inside the box wasn't just any ring. It was their grandmother's heirloom, a delicate band with a deep green emerald, their grandmother's favorite stone. And it was promised to Leona. Promised. Not formally, but in every quiet moment after tea, when Gran took her hands and said, "You're the one who understands me, who listens, who remembers. This is yours when the time comes." Brielle had never even visited Gran in the final 6 months. Leona stared at the ring as Brielle slid it onto her finger with practiced flourish. Her stomach flipped. She said nothing, but her silence screamed. Their mother leaned in, mistaking shock for joy. "Isn't it perfect? When we cleaned out Gran's house, I found it in the back of her jewelry chest. I thought, why let it collect dust?" The words burned. Leona's mouth tasted of rusted metal and old dust. She'd been the one who sorted Gran's estate, labeled every photo, folded her shawls with trembling hands. The ring wasn't in the chest. She had checked. It must have been taken after. Quietly, secretly, without a word. Later that night, alone in her car, she cried like she hadn't in years, not because of the ring, but because of what it meant. They had erased her. Chapter 2. The messages they forgot I could read. Monday came too fast. Leona buried herself in her rounds at the hospital, trying to muffle the bitterness with routine. She smiled at patients, laughed when necessary, even helped an elderly man Skype his grandson. But beneath the surface, something hardened. A slow chill in her bones that came not from grief, but realization. This wasn't new. It was just the final slap in a pattern she had long pretended not to see. That night, she opened an old email account she hadn't checked in months. The one linked to Gran's Facebook, which Leona had been asked to monitor for a while after her passing. No one had bothered to ask her to shut it down. There were messages. One stood out. From Mom to Brielle. Date, 3 months ago. "She won't even notice it's missing. You deserve something nice for once. Besides, Leona has always been too sentimental for her own good." Leona's breath caught. There were more. From Brielle. "Leona's going to flip when she sees the ring. I almost hope she does. She needs to learn the world doesn't revolve around her nursing shifts and martyr complex." Another message, another stab. From Mom again. "Let her be the one to take care of the estate. That girl would clean a corpse if it meant feeling needed." It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. They had mocked her kindness, exploited it, laughed behind her back while she scrubbed floors and signed hospice forms. And now they expected her to smile and clap. She wouldn't cry anymore. They had picked the wrong sister to betray, quietly. Chapter 3. The guest list. Leona didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, she did what they never expected her to do. She planned. Brielle's engagement party was a month away, an event that promised glam and glitz in the garden, complete with a hired photographer, catered canapes, and a flower arch imported from Italy. Leona RSP'd yes. She even offered to help coordinate. Brielle, smug with triumph, accepted. "Just don't wear scrubs," she said, rolling her eyes. "This isn't one of your sad little work parties." Leona smiled, took the details, and stayed late after her shifts, but not to rest. She was researching. And she found something. Something big. Brielle's fiancé, Camden Rhodes, was not who he said he was. Or at least not entirely. His name showed up on an old patient's contact form, years ago. A minor detail, but Leona remembered the case vividly. A fraud report linked to elderly financial abuse. Her hands shook as she dug deeper. Property transfers, limited liability company shell companies, a string of aliases. It wasn't ironclad, but it was more than suspicion. She printed the documents, carefully, quietly. Then she made a second set of prints, and this time not about Camden. These were copies of the emails. The ones where her mother and sister laughed about stealing Gran's ring. The one that said she won't even notice. She put them in an envelope, tucked it into a silver clutch, and slipped the clutch into a labeled gift box wrapped in pink and gold ribbon. It was addressed to the future Mrs. Rhodes, "With all my love, Leona." She sealed it, wrote her speech, and smiled. The morning of the engagement party arrived wrapped in curated perfection. Cream-white tents stood like whispers across the Rothschilds' vineyard estate, hired by Brielle, who wanted something elegant but still down to earth. Fairy lights dangled overhead like promises, and guests wandered beneath flower arches with crystal flutes of rosé. It was a Pinterest board brought to life, and Leona stood at the center of it, unnoticed but omnipresent. She wore a long forest green dress that clung to her like armor, her hair swept back in a twist Gran used to do for her before choir competitions, and in her hand, a single clutch, silver, delicate, zipped tight. No one noticed how her fingers clenched it. No one ever noticed. Brielle was glowing, a parade float of perfection in blush tulle, her hair curled in effortless spirals, her makeup photo-ready and flawless. She was surrounded by her friends, girls Leona had once known in high school, but who now smiled at her like a stranger. "Leona, you actually wore makeup," Brielle giggled, her champagne voice dripping with saccharine surprise. "You look really nice." Leona smiled, teeth gritted behind lip gloss. "Thanks. You look exactly like I imagined." "You mean gorgeous?" Brielle twirled, the ring flashing in the sun like an accusation. Leona said nothing. She simply turned her gaze toward Camden, who stood near the bar in a linen vest, sipping a cocktail with an easy smile. He looked exactly like someone who would walk out of your house with your grandmother's checkbook in his back pocket. She knew what she was about to do would fracture everything, but that was the point. Some families need to be shattered before they can rebuild honestly. The speeches began at golden hour. Guests gathered on the velvet lawn, seated at long tables lined with garlands of eucalyptus and soft candlelight. Leona sat beside her father, who leaned over and whispered, "You holding up, kiddo?" His voice was warm, familiar, a rare crack in the fog. She didn't answer. She just smiled sadly. Brielle stood first, beaming. "I just want to thank everyone for being here, for supporting me and Camden. I always believed in soulmates, and now I have the ring and the proof." Polite laughter, a few cheers. Camden kissed her hand. Brielle basked in it. Then Leona rose. She hadn't warned anyone she'd be speaking, just took the microphone when the last toast ended and cleared her throat beneath the fairy lights. "I wasn't going to say anything," she began, "but sometimes silence allows things to stay broken. And I'm tired of pretending broken is fine." Brielle's smile faltered slightly. Their mother's eyebrows lifted. A few guests leaned forward. "I loved my grandmother, deeply. We were close, closer than anyone probably realized," Leona continued, her voice soft but steady. She used to tell me stories from her childhood, show me her old postcards, and always said that one day something special would be mine. A ring. Not because of value, but because it symbolized our bond. Whispers rippled. Someone coughed. Brielle's face froze. Well, today I saw that ring, Leona said, locking eyes with her sister, on someone else's finger, and I said nothing, until now. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the gift-wrapped box. I brought a gift, she said, handing it to Brielle. Something you forgot I kept receipts for. Brielle took it hesitantly, eyes narrowing. Her fingers trembled as she opened the box. Inside, the printed emails, the records, the quiet, ugly truths, neatly stacked like a surgeon's tools. What is this? Brielle whispered. Leona's voice didn't waver. It's everything you said when you thought I was too tired, too busy, or too obedient to look. And it's proof that you didn't just take a ring. You took a legacy. You laughed while doing it. And now, well, now the whole room knows. There was silence. Thick, raw, buzzing. And then someone stood. It was Camden, but not to defend Brielle. Instead, he said almost too calmly, "Can we speak in private?" Leona smiled tightly. "Actually, Camden, you may want to stay seated for this next part." From her bag, she pulled a second envelope, a different color. This one addressed to Camden Rhodes, a.k.a. Joseph R. Darnell, doing business as C&C Ventures, LLC. She handed it to her father. "You might want to read that before you co-sign the engagement papers." Her father opened the envelope, scanning it with furrowed brows. A long pause, then he stood. "We need to talk," he said to Camden. His voice was low and lethal. "Now!" Guests murmured, confusion giving way to gossip, eyes darting like wildfire. Brielle sat frozen, clutching the open documents, mouth parted in disbelief. Leona exhaled, not in triumph, but release. This wasn't revenge. It was exposure, and it had only just begun. The vineyard felt colder after the speech. The laughter had drained from the party like wine spilled on silk, staining everything it touched. The champagne flutes sat abandoned on linen-draped tables, fizz going flat in the silence. And Brielle? Brielle still hadn't moved. She sat on the edge of a bench near the fountain, clutching the crumpled emails like they might evaporate if she held them tighter. Her eyes weren't teary. They were blank. Hollow, not out of guilt, but shock, embarrassment, rage. Leona watched her from a distance, her green dress catching in the breeze like a quiet rebellion. She didn't feel powerful, not victorious, just tired. Her father had taken Camden aside, or Joseph, as the paperwork now proved. Leona hadn't followed, but she could imagine the conversation. The barely contained fury, the confusion over tax IDs and corporate fraud, the way her father's pride would ripple under the shame of almost giving his blessing to a man with fake names and real debt. She wished she could say she'd done it for him, for Gran, for everyone. But mostly it had been for herself, and that, in itself, felt like healing. The sun had dipped below the hills when Leona finally approached Brielle. No cameras followed, no guests hovered, just the two of them, as it always should have been. Two sisters sitting in the ruins of what one had built on lies. "I didn't do this to humiliate you," Leona said softly. Brielle scoffed. "Well, congrats, you did. You humiliated yourself, I just stopped hiding it." That landed like a slap. Brielle blinked at the pages in her lap, then up at her sister. "You waited for the party to blow it all up? That's cold, even for you." Leona shook her head, her voice calm. "Number cold was taking something you knew meant the world to me and smiling while you wore it like a trophy. Cold was laughing with Mom about how I wouldn't notice. Cold was stealing a dead woman's promise and making a toast with it." Silence again. The fountain gurgled quietly behind them. Somewhere, a bird chirped in the olive trees like the world hadn't just shifted. Brielle's eyes hardened. "You always thought you were better than me." "No," Leona whispered. "I always hoped you could be better than this." The moment stretched, and then Brielle stood, her heels cracking against the stone path like punctuation. You know what, Leo? I hope it was worth it. Because all you've done is prove what everyone already knew, that you'd rather be right than loved. She didn't wait for a response, just turned and walked toward the tent, shoulders tight, face lifted, as if she could outrun the whispers beginning to bloom behind her. Leona didn't follow. She didn't need to. The truth, once spilled, never really dries. Later, as the moon cast silver on the vineyard rows, Leona sat alone at a side table. The music had long stopped. Staff were cleaning up. Her father re-emerged, quiet and pale, lips pressed in a grim line. She didn't know, he said without preamble, sitting down beside her. About Camden, about the fake companies. At least she claims she didn't. Leona nodded slowly. Do you believe her? He sighed. I believe she wanted to believe the version of him she could show off. They sat there for a moment, two people trying to make sense of a family that had always preferred appearances over apologies. I'm sorry, Leona, he said finally, for all of it, for letting it get this far. She looked at him, startled by the honesty. Thanks. Your mom's not talking to me, he added. She says I ruined the party. Leona's laugh was dry and sudden. I guess we both did. He smiled faintly. Better us than her wedding. Leona's heart twisted. Do you think they'll still get married? Her father looked out at the tent where Brielle stood alone under the lights, typing furiously on her phone. Your sister doesn't like being embarrassed, he said, but she hates being abandoned more. Leona followed his gaze, and for a moment, she didn't see a villain. She saw a girl desperate not to lose again. Leona left the party before anyone else. She didn't say goodbye to Brielle, or her mother, or the guests now whispering at valet stands. She walked quietly to her car, the clutch still in her hand, the green dress flowing like a final chapter she hadn't yet written. As she turned the key in the ignition, her phone buzzed. A single text, from unknown number. You have no idea who you've messed with. This isn't over. She stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It came days later, quietly, through mailboxes, emails, cold calls from lawyers. And it wasn't Brielle's doing, not directly. It was their mother. Leona stood in her kitchen, staring at the letter she had just pulled from a certified envelope. No greeting, just a polite, sterile paragraph from a family attorney she'd only met once, during Gran's will reading. This letter serves as formal notice of your removal from co-executorship of Margaret Devoren's estate. Per a family consensus, and given recent disruptions, it is in the best interest of familial harmony that this role be reassigned. There was no signature at the bottom, only a firm name, but the message was clear. She was being cut out. Again. Not just from the past, but from the very thing she had fought to preserve. Leona placed the letter on the counter, her fingers trembling. Not from shock, but recognition. They were circling the wagons now, closing ranks, the way families sometimes do when shame becomes too heavy to face head-on. Her phone buzzed. Dad, I just found out I didn't sign off on this. Call me when you can. She didn't call. Not yet. Instead, she brewed tea, the same chamomile blend Gran used to steep when things felt frayed. She wrapped herself in her old college sweatshirt, curled into the corner of the couch, and scrolled through the file she'd been assembling over the past 2 weeks. A quiet insurance policy. Because Leona knew something they didn't. She still had access to the safe deposit box Gran had opened under her name, the one no one else had known about. Inside, it wasn't just jewelry or money. It was something more damning. A handwritten letter, addressed to my Leona if they ever tried to rewrite what was yours. She opened the box again that weekend. The letter was still there, aged paper folded neatly, written in the same shaky hand that had once traced the rim of a teacup beside her at dusk. Dearest girl, if you're reading this, they've likely forgotten what love is supposed to look like. I've seen it happen in this family before. Don't let them rob you twice, once in silence, and again in gaslight. This ring, this legacy, they were meant for you. I left this letter here because I feared what would happen when I was gone. You were the only one who ever asked me what I wanted. I hope you remember that. All my love, Gran. Attached to it, a notarized document. Gran had formally amended her will 3 months before her stroke, leaving the emerald ring explicitly to Leona. No one had known, because no one had asked. Leona stared at the paper, her breath catching. The lie had just lost its legs. The family brunch the next Sunday was a thinly veiled intervention. Her mother greeted her at the door with a brittle smile. Her father hugged her too tightly. Brielle didn't even look up from her mimosa. They'd invited her to clear the air. But the moment Leona stepped inside, she saw the way they had already rewritten the script. Brielle's hair was tied back like an apology. The framed engagement photo sat on the side table, Camden nowhere in sight. The air was floral and tense. I think we've all made mistakes, her mother began as they sat. But we're still family. We have to move forward. Leona leaned back in her chair, placing her purse beside her, the document resting inside like a sleeping lion. I agree, she said. We should move forward, with the truth. Her mother stiffened. Leona! She pulled the papers out and placed them on the table. This is Gran's real intention, she said calmly. This is what was in the safe deposit box she opened under my name. Her father took the paper gently. His eyes moved slowly across the page. When he finished reading, he closed his eyes and sighed through his nose. A sound of sorrow, not surprise. Brielle snatched the letter, scanning it. Her lips parted, then closed. Her mother's face crumbled. That can't be real. We never saw. You didn't look, Leona said. Silence fell over the brunch like fog. Thick, cold, absolute. I'm not here to sue anyone. I'm not here for revenge, Leona said. But I'm also not letting you rewrite history to fit your comfort. Her father finally spoke. What do you want? She looked at them, really looked. I want you to acknowledge what you did. I want my name restored on the estate, and I want the ring back. Brielle blinked rapidly. You'd wear it? After all this? Leona's voice dropped. Number, I'll keep it somewhere safe. Because Gran didn't give it to me so I could show it off. She gave it to me because I listened when she spoke. For once, no one had a comeback. Later that evening, as she walked to her car, Brielle followed her outside. You always get to be the righteous one, she snapped, arms crossed. You know that? Leona turned to her, soft but unwavering. Number, I just stopped pretending that being quiet meant being kind. Brielle stepped closer. I never meant to hurt you. Yes, you did, Leona said gently. You just didn't think I'd do anything about it. They stared at each other for a beat. And in that silence, something old finally cracked between them, not healed, but exposed, honest, raw. Leona didn't wait for more. She got into her car, closed the door, and for the first time in years, drove home without swallowing her voice. 3 weeks after the cottage was officially transferred to her name, Leona received a call from an unfamiliar number. She hesitated before answering, still wary after that anonymous threat weeks earlier. But this call wasn't cryptic. It was Sloane Harrison, Gran's childhood best friend and former attorney, someone who hadn't shown up to the funeral because she was in remission and living in Maine. I saw the news from the legal transfer, Sloane said, her voice aged but fierce. About the estate, the ring, Margaret would be thrilled. You were always her favorite. Leona smiled, her chest unexpectedly warm. Thank you. I didn't know she told people that. Oh, she told me everything, Sloane said. That family of yours? They never knew the half of what Margaret prepared, but you should. Leona's pulse quickened. What do you mean? She left something else, a letter, not in the will, not in the safe deposit box. She gave it to me, asked me to hold it until Leona claims what was already hers. Her words, not mine. Leona's fingers tightened around the phone. Do you still have it? Of course, Sloane said. Come get it, and bring the ring. It'll make sense when you read it. The train ride to Maine felt like moving backward through time. Leona sat with the ring in its velvet box on her lap, wrapped in a silk scarf. The countryside flashed past, wild hills, naked trees, and hints of early spring clinging to the edges of fields like whispered promises. When she arrived, Sloane greeted her at the front porch of a cottage that felt like it had grown roots into the coast. Sloane hugged her tightly, then led her inside where tea waited, as if Gran herself had orchestrated it. Then she handed her the letter. Cream paper, familiar handwriting, but older, shakier. The same ink Gran used to write birthday cards with. Leona unfolded it slowly. My Leona, if you're reading this, it means the ring found its way back to you. It was never meant to be worn for show. That stone, it's older than you know. Your great-grandmother wore it, as did I, and now you. But it's not just a symbol. Inside the lining of the box, beneath the velvet, is a key. Not to something valuable, to something true. In the attic of this very cottage, beneath the floorboards near the east window, I left a chest, filled with the story no one wanted told. I've kept secrets, ones that explain why your mother learned to lie, why your sister believes love is control, and why I gave you more than jewelry. Go there when you're ready. The real legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you uncover. Love always, Gran. Leona looked up slowly. Sloane nodded once. I've never read it, but I know where the chest is. Let me show you. The attic smelled of salt and cedar. Sloane pointed to the far corner near the eastern window. A plank was already loosened. Gran must have prepared it in advance. Together, they lifted it. And there it was. A weathered trunk, small, metal-lined, the lock glinting in the dim light. Leona pulled the box from her purse and slid the emerald ring out. Carefully, she peeled back the velvet inside. Tucked deep in the fabric, just as Gran said, was a rusted key. Her breath caught. She inserted it into the lock and turned. The chest creaked open. Inside, journals, photographs, letters. Some yellowed with age, others sharp with recent ink. On top of everything, a note. Truth is a burden the brave carry, so others can walk free. You've always been brave, Leona. Now find the pieces we were too afraid to face. Leona's fingers brushed across the first page of the top journal, the script unmistakably her mother's. Young, poetic, raw. The past wasn't just preserved here, it was waiting to be heard. And Leona, for the first time in her life, felt ready to listen. Leona sat alone in the attic of the coastal cottage, cross-legged on an old wool rug, surrounded by a lifetime no one had spoken about. The trunk was a time capsule, not of wealth or jewelry, but of stories and scars. Gran had saved everything. Letters from her mother's teenage years, unsent postcards from a rehab facility Leona didn't even know her mother had been in, journals filled with desperation, fear, longing. Photographs of a younger version of her mother with hollow eyes and bruised arms. Receipts from nights spent in motels far from home. A diary from Gran herself, written during the months when her husband, Leona's grandfather, had disappeared for business trips, but left behind empty bank accounts and a bottle full of anger. The lies had been inherited, not invented. And for the first time, Leona saw the truth not as a weapon, but as a wound. Gran hadn't wanted revenge. She had wanted someone to break the cycle. She had chosen Leona not because she was strong, but because she wouldn't pretend. And now, it was time to honor that. 2 weeks later, Leona called a family meeting. This time, it wasn't a brunch or a party. No cameras, no champagne, just 4 chairs in Gran's garden, under the plum tree, in the home now legally Leona's, though she had never thought of it as hers alone. Her father came first, quiet and respectful. Her mother arrived with folded arms and downcast eyes. Brielle appeared last, face unreadable, posture defensive. Leona didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply laid the trunk on the table and opened it. At first, no one moved. Then, slowly, her father reached in and pulled out a photograph. Her mother took a folded letter, one she had written but never mailed. Brielle touched a yellowed journal like it might burn her. "This is the truth," Leona said softly. "The parts we hid from each other. The parts Gran refused to let die in silence." Her mother blinked hard. "She never told me she kept all this." "She didn't want to shame you," Leona said. "She wanted to understand you, but she couldn't fix what she wasn't allowed to see." They sat in silence, the wind rustling the plum branches overhead. Leona continued, "I didn't bring you here to rehash the past. I brought you here because this is what we come from. This is what shaped us, and it's time we stop pretending we're fine." Her father nodded, slowly, carefully. Her mother swallowed. Then, in the smallest voice Leona had ever heard from her, she whispered, "I don't know who I am without the pretending." "Then maybe we figure it out together," Leona said. And Brielle, who had said nothing, finally looked up. Her eyes, usually glassy with pride, were wet. "I read the journal," she said. "The one where she wrote about Mom running away, about the night she came back with a black eye and refused to explain it. I always thought Mom was cold. I didn't know she was protecting herself." Leona nodded. "Me neither, but now we do." They stayed in the garden for hours, not talking all the time, sometimes just passing papers or reading aloud or crying quietly into teacups. It wasn't therapy, but it was something close. It was truth. In the months that followed, things didn't become perfect, but they became honest. Her mother started attending group therapy. Her father offered to help repair the old cottage fence Gran had always said needed replacing. And Brielle, surprisingly, took a volunteer role at a local domestic shelter, saying she needed to remember what love wasn't. Leona didn't need the ring anymore. She placed it in a shadow box with Gran's letter, the deed to the house, and a photograph of the plum tree in full bloom. Not a trophy, a reminder of what was taken, what was restored, and what was now protected. One evening, Leona stood at the back porch of the cottage, the ocean breeze soft against her face. The garden behind her was beginning to bloom again, real this time, earned. She looked out at the sea, where the sun dipped low and slow across the waves, and she smiled. Not because everything had been resolved, but because for the first time in her life, nothing was hidden, and that was enough.